My name is Lieutenant Commander David Antico. What we're going to discuss in my TED Talk is, can simulation foster an overview of what we're going to discuss is what is the problem. So we're going to kind of go into, can simulation foster critical thinking, or is simulation, as the majority of programs and simulation centers currently do, is more of an algorithmic type of simulation from point A to point B and going through the steps, but not necessarily the ability to think. The state of the art for both the Navy and the Marine Corps, what's currently out there, what current programs are using, and what the desire is. Then we're going to get into what is critical thinking and what is competence, defining those two items, and then from that, seeing if we are actually able to meet the definition of critical thinking and competence. We'll discuss current practice, then how this relates to modeling and simulation within each of the services, the DoD, and as a whole, how we use it today, even the future of this topic for the future. The problem. So as many people have noticed in their simulation experiences or where they currently work, is simulation is used. There's no doubt about it. We are moving in this direction for almost everything that we do in the service, whether medical to infantry. There is some sort of simulated and modeling experience utilized to better train in the reduction of time, resources, money. But often these programs are not standardized. They follow some sort of algorithm. If you look at ACLS, PALS, BLS as an example, they go from one point to the other using an algorithm and kind of forces you to critically think, if that makes sense, to do something. It does not usually give you the option to think on your own, to reason your way through a problem. Another issue is the time and effort to create a different or a not standardized, simulation experience can be time consuming. A lot of the products that we have come from the manufacturer with a set simulation experience book programmed in, and if you follow it, you get in that algorithmic experience, and then to create something on your own sometimes is very tedious, time consuming, and if you're not accustomed to it, it has too many errors. And there are many programs out there that are based on this algorithmic approach. It's also hard to test one's ability to critically think through these problems. Based on an algorithmic scenario, you're just forced and guided through a set of wickets to hit. And once you hit those wickets, the simulator moves on to the next step, or you get a reaction or a patient change, and you treat that. Sometimes, often, they are not the ability to critically think, to say, okay, if I do this, this is what's going to happen, without it already being processed and planned out for you. And how do we use a simulation to tap into someone's education and knowledge to hone these skills versus a BLS, ACLS robotic response? We'll touch a little bit later when we do competence and what is critical thinking, but how do we do that? We train and spend lots of money and acquire people into the service with certain skills, and we train them to have certain skills. But once they are in, we sometimes dumb it down to keep the bare minimum, and then say, hey, you're a doctor, you're a nurse, you have this experience, you have this training, you should be able to critically think on your own in your own practice, but we're just trying to accomplish the basic stuff to create some sort of baseline, which in turn de-standardizes the process, as then everyone has a different baseline to which work off of, or a different set of skills going into to create a baseline. State of the art, as we've seen in our program, the Department of Defense Modeling Simulation Book of Knowledge, Acquisition, Modeling and Simulation Master Plan, is these overarching plans that we have that says, okay, there is identified need. The service has played into it and said, yep, we agree, we disagree, this is what we need, this is what we don't need. But we all say, hey, there's a need for simulation to some extent, and then how do we acquire and get these items so that we can be more productive and beneficial. Joint Project Management Office, Medical Modeling and Simulation. a newer office out off of the DoD that is kind of looking at medical modeling, more specific, from scenarios to simulators to virtual reality, VR type stuff, to enhance what we currently have and do to make us a better force. The Navy has, again, model and simulation master plan and many BUMED instructions that force us into using simulation to some extent, because we're not always going to be in combat. We're always not going to see the trauma that we need to train to, therefore forcing us down a simulation road. And then in the Marine Corps Training and Education Command, status of operations technology is the same thing. They're looking for the virtual reality, first-person shooter type games in order to train the infantry to build these skills and to work through these complex scenarios when they are forcing small unit leadership for E4s, E5s to make strategic decisions on the battlefield without having all the other knowledge and background to get them to critically think, to realize that what they're going to do has an effect, which then can be brought over to the medical side of it for the same thing when dealing with foreign nationals, NGOs, IGOs. So now we'll get into what is critical thinking. Several definitions that you can read for yourself, so I won't bore anyone with them, but it's this idea of thinking on your own, using all of the evidence and education and knowledge and personal experience that one might have to come up with a clear, rational decision that can be justified, explained, and defended if need be for some sort of action. Where we get into the problem is, how do we define reality? We say that, yes, you can formulate a response or formulate a knowledgeable answer to a problem, but everyone's critical thinking might be a little bit different. Depending on your background, your education, your training experiences, you might think one thing is correct and someone else might have a different idea. Both are critically thinking. Both may come up with the right answer, may not come up with the right answer. But what is that? How are we defining and trying to get them to critically think? And if we can't define it, how do we know we're training to the standard or even doing this correctly? So if we can't define what is critical thinking and what we're looking for someone to do that, quote unquote, gets them to critically think versus an algorithmic response, i.e. ACLS, PALS type of stuff, how do we do that? Once we can do that and set up, okay, this is what we want to do, these are the critical thinking elements that we want to get from somebody, is have them voice or demonstrate, then we can take that and move it into a scenario or simulation. So now we kind of talked about critical thinking. How do we define competence? How do we say your critical thinking, your thought process meets some sort of a standard that you can be released into the medical community and be competent in what you do? So again, we'll start off with the definition. Ability to do something successfully and efficiently, do your job properly, but again, how do we define reality? Are you minimally competently safe in your performance evaluations, that you're not doing great, you're just doing average, so you still are competent, you're not killing anybody per se, but are we just looking for baseline qualified and competent, or are we looking for something that is, we want that higher level thinking, we want someone to critically think to be completely competent, and that way can be rest assured in their judgment and their thought process when we need them to be. And if we can't define, or there are different levels of competence, how do we know we're training to that standard or correctly? Are we looking for, again, that baseline, you can do BLS, or are we looking for an intensivist take on ACLS, or a pediatrician on PALS, that we're just not looking for that basic, I have my card, but how do I apply that and then critically think all the other nuances that you might incur when dealing with a patient like that. So current practice, again, simulation used across numerous platforms and programs. Tri-service, DoD, civilian sector, we are going to simulation. We often use some sort of an algorithmic simulation that limits someone's ability to critically think or think outside that box. Again, ACLS, PALS, and then IV insertion. Again, you're going for do this, see this, do this type of thing, and not really, hey, if you don't get flashback, what do you do, or you infiltrate? We're looking for, okay, what do you do after you get that? Not, okay, well, simulation, you pull it out and start all over, wait a little bit, the fluid recedes, but how do you do that on real people? And then resource limitations, the time to train, the space, what, you're setting up simulation ad hoc in an old patient room, or when a patient room opens up, students, are you able to get a dedicated group of students that are willing to do this and aren't just going through the motions because they are required to do, that it's something that's beneficial to them, that they are actually getting something out of it and learning something, versus you will be here to do this and then move on, but you still got to do the rest of your job. Instructors, everyone rotates every couple years, so once you get familiar with a simulator or a process or a scenario, it's time for you to go, and then programs start from scratch. And then funding. Do you have low fidelity simulators? You got high fidelity simulators, the warranty, the maintenance, the upkeep, and then the buying new ones if needed, or getting forced to buy something is or is not there. So how do we measure critical thinking? It could be considered an art with several correct answers that vary from the experience, knowledge, background of the individual doing it. If we would do a checklist that say, hey, you need to do these wickets to be competent and to be showing your critical thinking, could do it, but it's more of an empirical check the box, yes, no, and might not work as a blanket answer across all the simulations. And the other question is, can you fail to clearly think? Do you over or underthink? Which would then allow you could still say, yeah, you are critically thinking, but you're thinking at a very rudimentary level that you can understand textbook type stuff, but you don't have the ability to apply it to real life. Or are you so well trained and the information is too basic that you're actually overthinking it and inserting a lot more variables or what ifs than is needed or required, and it just confuses everybody. And again, if we can't measure critical thinking, how do we know we're training to it incorrectly? Can simulation solve the problem? I believe it can. I believe we are getting to that point where the technology exists that helps us achieve a very close to desired end state. Obviously, the best simulation is real-life experience on a real human or patient or whatnot, but our technology is catching up to that. We have mannequins and simulators that have fairly realistic skins. You have mannequins that you can cut and feel like you're actually cutting through real skin, that you can suture, that you can do procedures on with arthroscopy or surgery. So the technology is getting there, and with that, it allows the individual to think more. It makes them think more. You just don't get someone telling you, like, you cut into here, they're bleeding. You actually see that blood coming out. If you cut down too deep, you see the fake organs, if you will, or the bone structures, and the actual reaction to a medication dose versus just a medication or the wrong medication. And you get that simulated patient response. So it kind of forces you to think critically. The dedicated resources to fully implement and employ simulation. Again, with a big push to use this type of equipment to solve the deficiencies in time, budget, combat, or that real-life experience, the time and effort, money, and programs are being set up to use simulation to bridge that gap. And then design of a simulation program that allows free thinking and the ability to go off script to deep dive thought processes. Kind of reiterates where the technology is going, but it's out there. It allows us to free think, to develop scenarios that are applicable to what we want to do, and then have that ability to go off script and question somebody and have that group discussion, the bouncing off ideas, teamwork approach, with the understanding that you're never really possibly by yourself in many cases, and you have that ability for that team to say, hey, that's a good idea, that's great, but maybe try this way, or did you think about this way? And kind of using some of that team approach that gets presented in the ACLS, PALS type process. So again, the future, technology is catching up. The resources will be available for simulation, as is the greater desire for a competent, ready force with the decrease in available resources and options to obtain the training, the patient experience, and getting us where we want to go without that other stuff. And the feedback from the manufacturers that is currently being used and push them our goal. So right now, a lot of programs out there say, hey, we want a realistic mannequin. Well, what does realistic mean to us? We don't necessarily need all the bells and whistles. We need a mannequin that does X, Y, and Z. And if it has A, B, and C, that's great, but we're really never going to use it, and then being fiscally responsible of what we can to maybe use that extra funding for A, B, and C to get a better X, Y, and Z, or the warranty, or the other consumable items to then sustain that simulator for the future. That is it. I hope everyone got a little bit of insight and problems of an understanding of where some of our problems with the critical thinking in the Department of Defense is in regards to simulation and ways that we can take each of our own programs and funding and desires and programs and then push those forward and rethink of how we're actually using simulation to test students to get a desired end product that meets everyone's mission. Thank you.